What creates a symbol of excellence? Is it time, or consistency, or nostalgia? Is it the people, or the circumstances? And how long does it last? The football fans of Pittsburgh had waited 40 years for a winner, and when it finally arrived, all traces of the lovable losers were gone. So, how did it happen? When did it begin? Why has it sustained? The answer can be traced to an 11-year span that launched 12 Hall of Fame careers and saw greatness born and sustained in a city fueled by passion and forged in steel. The football team in Pittsburgh reflects the working-class heroes who live there. For 40 years, the team worked hard and played hard. They were a hard-scrabble team to match a hard-scrabble town. But whereas the steel workers' sweat and strain helped win wars and build skyscrapers, the team lost regularly and often was relegated to the division cellar.
I'd been on the Steelers when they were a very bad team, when Johnny Carson would tell Steeler jokes on his show, and how we were just the ridicule of the NFL.
When I came to Pittsburgh, there was a saying that if there's a way for the Steelers to lose a game, same old Steelers, they'll lose the game.
We played at the University of Pittsburgh, and you know, we'd have probably 23,000, 24,000 people, sometimes 17, to come and see those games.
Well, I really never got mad, but of course I was frustrated every game, although people didn't know it. They thought that I was the finest loser of all time, but I wasn't. I felt just as bad about losing as anybody else, but I never said anything.
Known as the Chief, owner Art Rooney hired Packers assistant Bill Austin in 1966.
That's all you get in there, Charlie! Well, knock him off, Andy!
He was like the Lombardi school, you know, discipline. And, you know, there's certain times you just got fed up with it.
Tight end came across, and I tried to give him a shot and keep on going. Got to get back in that area so you can getting the fullback, you know. Was that my man? Was he my man? Yeah, he was right through the circle area.
I think another thing with Austin was he left so much on the practice field. You couldn't produce the rest of the time because you were already burned out. It was to the point where it was obsessive.
Veterans rebuffed Austin's rigid ways, and he lasted just 3 seasons. Pittsburgh was starting over, again. But this time, the Chief was building an infrastructure that would create a new culture.
Well, I think Art realized that his way of doing things was holding the whole effort back, and also his propensity for being a PR guy, which he was the ultimate PR guy. He, I think, wisely decided, why I can be the PR guy, I can have my son here be the guy in charge and the guy who deals with the nuts and bolts.
The Chief was still very much there, and everything ran through him, but he wasn't hands-on day-to-day the way he had been before.
With 2 of his 5 sons involved with the team, Rooney let them run the day-to-day aspects of the organization.
It was a very clear delineation of authority. You had Dan, who was really running the business side of the Steelers, and you had Art Jr., who was the player personnel football side of the operation.
A lot to be said for nepotism. The secret of nepotism is Alan Shepard, when he was going to get blasted off. His prayer was, "Dear Lord, please don't let me allow me to mess this up."
Art Jr. was just had more of his dad's sort of personality. His a gregarious, kind of fun-loving, went through the day with his sleeves rolled up, tie pulled down. Dan was a more pragmatic, tie in place, button-down shirt, let's get this meeting started kind of guy.
The philosophical changes were immediate and have lasted over a generation. It became known as the Steeler Way.
The Steeler Way really is a combination of many things. And as I say, just to bring it down to simple form would be to say do things right.
It's a much more sincerely business-like approach than the chief had.
To have him there in place, fully understanding the family, fully understanding what the Rooney's investment in that team was, but being a good, solid businessman, having him there to sort of steer the ship was a very, very big part of that team having success at that time.
Despite the off-the-field changes, Pittsburgh still needed a head coach to improve the team on the field. Once again, Pittsburgh sought an assistant from a winning team. But everything else about the hire would be different.
It's really my brother Dan's job to find, get the new coach. I kept on asking, scouts and assistant coaches and college coaches, who would be a good coach in the NFL? And the name that kept on coming up was Chuck Noll. At that time, he was with the Colts, with Shula. They told us, we know you're looking for a coach, and this Chuck Noll is the best coach going.
A former guard in Cleveland under Paul Brown, Noll had coached with Sid Gilman in San Diego.
Well, the season is over for the players, but just beginning for the coaches and the staff. Coaches Walt Hackett, Chuck Noll plan the defense for the coming season.
Working for Don Shula in Baltimore, Noll was the architect of one of the NFL's most dominant defenses.
We had a very good exchange. I could see that he was a very knowledgeable guy, bright guy. He knew football, he knew the team. I talked to him about our players. He had our players down pat. Well, then after that, I went home and told my father, I said, Chuck Noll's a guy you should talk to. My father said, keep him on the list. He said, I was impressed with him.
I had chances to go to New England and to Buffalo at that time. But after talking with Dan, I knew that they wanted to do what was right.
Upon getting the job, Noll pulled no punches with his stars.
He called me in the off season. I got a call that he wanted to see me, and I thought, well, I'd made my first Pro Bowl in 1968 prior to him coming, and I thought, well, he's calling me in to congratulate me. He kind of motioned me to the chair and shook hands, but it wasn't overly friendly. And he looks at me and he says, Russell, I've been watching the game film since I've taken over the job here, and he said, I don't like how you play. I was just stunned, and he said, you're too aggressive, you're too out of control, you're trying to be the hero, you're trying to make big plays. I'm going to change the way you play. I'll make you a better player in the future than you are now because you're not disciplined enough.
His first meeting with the entire team was just as blunt.
He said, look, I've been watching the game films since I took the job, and I can tell you guys that the reason you've been losing is not because of your attitude or you don't have a losing mentality or your psyche or any of that stuff. It's not that you haven't tried hard enough. The problem is you're not good enough. You can't run fast enough, you can't jump high enough, you're not quick enough. Your techniques are just abysmal. I'm going to probably have to get rid of most of you, and we're going to move on.
I didn't exactly say that, but I said we have to get better,
The team got better because Noll stuck to the basics.
Chuck Noll is a detailed man, is a defensive man. Ball control, run, control the clock, minimize your turnovers, and pretty much it.
And he said, this is not a terribly difficult game. It's blocking and tackling and making no mistakes.
You have to win by blocking well and tackling well, out-hitting your opponents.
And if you do that, then, that's motivation. A lot of people think motivation comes from the mouth, and it doesn't. Motivation comes from helping somebody get the job done. We wanted to make sure we were fundamentally sound. We wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing, and then we wanted to go out and execute it. And if you know what you're doing and you're sound, you should be successful.
Noll's approach to motivation went against NFL conventional wisdom.
Chuck was not a rah-rah kind of guy. Chuck was not a butt kicker. He was not a yeller. He was not a screamer. He was not in your face.
Chuck always preached that we needed to get better and that you got better one step at a time, one day at a time, one game at a time.
It's easy to tell you what to do, but But to tell you how to do it is really the most critical thing.
And all that yelling or jumping on the back isn't going to help.
Basically, he was saying, I'm not going to ever give you a motivational speech, because if I have to motivate you, I will fire you.
Inheriting a team that had won just 11 games over a 3-year period, Noel reworked the roster. He began with using the 4th pick in the 1969 draft to improve a porous defense.
Steelers' first-round selection, Joe Green.
What I knew about the Steelers at that time was not good. I knew that they had never won anything.
I was with the Colts at the time and went down to North Texas. I had the Texas territory scouting in the spring, and I watched him and talked to him a little bit, and there was no doubt in my mind that this guy, he loved to play football and wanted to play very badly, and to me those are two things that you really have to have.
Have you ever seen a dog get a hold of a snake and sling him aside? You know, just that's what Joe Green was like. Art Rooney said, that Joe Green, I never saw anybody lift a team like he did.
Green had incredible talent, but was raw and combustible. Noel's mission was to teach Green to play within his cerebral system.
At the time, I didn't want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler because of the history. I mean, how could I change it?
I remember we played Philadelphia near the end of the season. We needed to stop the Eagles from making a first down.
He felt he was being held because nobody could really block him. So I heard him tell the opponent that if you hold me one more time, I'm going to have to hurt you. The guy, of course, had to hold him, so he held him, and Joe hurt him. And it was early in the 4th quarter, and Joe Green decided the game was over. And he took the game ball, and he walked away. He said, this game's over. I said, Joe, you can't, what are you talking about? We've got, 11 minutes to play. He said, no, it's over. I'm stopping the game.
Joe went up and picked the ball up and threw it in the stands.
Which Bradshaw couldn't have thrown the ball that high.
That was not a good day for Joe Green and the Steelers.
And he was thrown out of the game. But every player there and every coach there saw this guy is for real. He's not going to put up with losing.
I could probably been with maybe at the time any other ball club in the league. I don't know if anyone would have tolerated my behavior the way Chuck did.
Noel was changing the mentality in Pittsburgh and building a quality roster, though neither would happen immediately.
We won our first ball game in '69, and I thought we were not too bad, but we proceeded to lose 13 in a row.
The Steelers embarked on a voyage that started as an Iliad of optimism and ended as an Odyssey of defeat. Still, they never gave up. The runners straining, lunging for extra yardage, fighting to overcome the agile mountains appearing before them.
Even in 1969, where we went 1-13, Chuck Noll never lost us.
We stuck with him, and we could see what he was doing. He never lost the team during that year.
Even in '69, you could just see, you could feel it, you could see it turning.
This is the new era for the Steelers. Steelers 70. It's not like the old Steelers, believe me. The public, the football world might as well wake up and just take what I'm saying and heed it, because we're going to be a winner this year. I'm sure of it.
1970 began with great promise. The team moved into a sparkling new stadium where they introduced their #1 draft pick. Bradshaw's preseason debut was impressive, and the Steelers looked like they'd put the ghosts of the past behind them.
There's a blonde bomber.
But with the start of the regular season, the early promise of Bradshaw's arrival went terribly wrong.
Terry's major problems coming in as a rookie and with great expectations was the fact that he had so much to learn. He was not accustomed to a more sophisticated offense and more sophisticated defenses.
Terry was on an uphill climb all the way from when he first came to Pittsburgh. Southern kid from Louisiana Tech. He was an outsider.
It was tough, and he struggled. There's no question about it. I'm sure there were times when he wished he was playing somewhere else.
I'm a small-town boy. I like the small cities, country life. Living in the city of Pittsburgh isn't exactly one of my goals in life.
After a string of early losses filled with rookie mistakes, the booing began.
You know, it used to be that it was taken for granted that a quarterback would take 5 years to mature. Having been the #1 player drafted, you didn't want to see him take that long. And so they got all over him. They were brutal.
I was devastated. I hyperventilated. It was like, well, I don't mean to play this bad.
When are we going to do Bradshaw?
I went to do a Monday night interview, and he said, I'm here with the #1 flop in the National Football League, rookie quarterback Terry Bradshaw.
Question number 1, Terry.
Yo!
Despite his often confrontational relationship with his quarterback, Chuck Noll never wavered from the team's mission to build the Steelers through the draft.
It was always Noll's theory, and also Dan Rooney and Art Rooney Jr.'s theory, that if you really wanted to build a championship team, you had to do it from the ground up. You had to form a nucleus and get the best players out of the colleges.
They put a premium on drafting guys from winning programs because they knew that in Pittsburgh they had never won anything. And part of building a winning foundation was building a winning attitude.
The franchise also avoided the quick fix of trading for veterans.
When I first went to Pittsburgh, everybody wanted to trade for our first-round choice. They wanted to give us all these guys that they didn't want, and so, you know, it kind of dawned on me that that's not what we want to do. We want to be able to bring people in, get them in our system, and not get somebody else's problems.
And I think that also goes to the fact that Chuck Noll wanted to mold players. He wanted a certain type of player, and I think he found it easier to mold younger players than players that had been around for a while.
We used to write away for transcripts because we wanted to see whether the player was in there with basket weaving or whether he wanted to challenge himself, because that spoke a lot about the individual. So we ended up getting a lot of guys that were not only good football players but wanted to be challenged. Those are champions to me.
To me, a sign of how good Noll was is that he took a lot of down-the-line draft choices and made Hall of Famers out of them.
With the 1971 class, the team reinforced the defense in support of Mean Joe Green. Rookies included lineman Dwight White and Ernie Holmes, and linebacker Jack Ham.
When Jack Ham was drafted, I was very happy that they put him on the other side because he could have taken my job in a heartbeat. I mean, he was just so gifted, both physically and mentally. He was a superstar virtually almost day one.
Pittsburgh's strategy to build through the draft would never have been possible without their scouting department.
If you want to go back to the 1970s, the Steelers were a step ahead of all the other teams in their scouting. Sometimes you had a dynasty.
There was a scout named Bill Nunn. He used to work for the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the biggest African-American newspapers in the country, one of the most respected, and he'd pick an all-American black team every year. Well, the Steelers picked up on that, and they hired Bill Nunn as a scout, and he went and found a lot of these guys in these small black schools that other teams had ignored, and he was picking them out left and right.
They led him to some players, and they led him to some places that other people didn't even know existed. And the Steelers sort of prided themselves in being kind of just old-fashioned bird dogs, you know, just rolling up their sleeves and getting in the car and driving down to these little colleges and watching them practice.
Along with their exhaustive talent search, the personnel department benefited from the NFL's postseason calendar.
The draft was held early back then, January, right after the Super Bowl. When the Super Bowl was played in mid-January, they'd have the draft like 2 weeks later.
And I've always thought that the reason they had had such superb drafts in the 70s was that the coaches hadn't had time to put their 2 cents in, to see these players a lot and look at a lot of videos, and the coaches hadn't had a chance to gum up the draft.
In 1972, the team shifted the focus back to offense and drafted Franco Harris, despite the misgivings of others.
There were a lot of mixed reports on him coming out of Penn State. There were a lot of people who said, yeah, he's talented, but he's not all that tough. It was not an overwhelmingly, boy, this is a great franchise player here, can't miss. There were some questions about Franco, but they saw in Franco tremendous physical talent. He had the size of a fullback but the speed of a halfback.
It was amazing, the impact he had on the team, the way it changed his team's fortunes.
It was like during World War II, the Battle of Midway. You know, the Americans never won a battle in the Pacific, and after Midway, we never lost one. Well, we never had a winning season before Franco got there, and never had a losing season while he was with us.
The most impressive thing about Franco was a preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons. That was the first indication that this guy was something special.
And Franco runs up to the line, looked like he stops and maybe scratches his head. What am I going to do now? And all of a sudden, he go,
handoff to Franco. He drives through.
Takes off. And this is probably a 65, 70-yard touchdown.
Joe Green tells me that at that moment in the Atlanta game, you made that run, said, we have something here now.
Gee, we got one. We got one.
Franco's 1972 season was nothing short of miraculous. Though he didn't start until the 6th game, he rushed for over 1,000 yards and earned Rookie of the Year honors.
1972 was magic. One thing started clicking. They were just clicking, and Steeler offense just seemed like it was just tailor-made for me.
Out of his 9 starts, he ran for over 100 yards in 7 of them, including 6 games in a row, to tie a record set by the legendary Jim Brown.
Handoff to Franco. He drives through. He has it to 102 yards. 50,000 people standing and applauding.
Riding on the back of Franco's shoulders, Pittsburgh went 11-3, earning their first ever division title.
And that was the quintessential turnaround year in '72. That was the year the Steelers went from the perennial loser, same old Steelers, to a team that was very, very good.
But the miracle year was not over. Thanks to an act of divine intervention in the divisional game against the Raiders. A moment forever steeped in legend and controversy.
It's down to one big play. 4th down and 10 yards to go. Hang on to your hat. 22 seconds remaining. Bradshaw running out of the pocket, looking for somebody to throw to. Fires it downfield. And there's a collision. As Dutton's caught out of the air. The ball is pulled in by Michael Harris. Harris is going for a touchdown for Pittsburgh. I don't even know where it came from.
The Immaculate Reception was the all-time worst call in the history of the NFL.
The Immaculate Reception. Who gave it that name? The Immaculate Deception. That's what it is.
In Oakland, they still believe, number one, that it hit not Jack Tatum, but Frenchie Fuqua.
I run out on the field, and they say, we don't know what happened. I said, I know you don't know what happened. I'll tell you what happened. I said, it hit Frenchie Fuqua. It's illegal. Franco Harris can't get, well, they told me to get the hell off the field.
The controversy laid in 2 receivers touching the ball. But again, anybody who has a rudimentary understanding of physics would understand that the call was correct. When you have a receiver running in that direction and a ball coming in that direction, if there's any kind of touch there, it's going to continue on. That's resultant forces. But all of a sudden the ball comes flying back, and the only person that could have done that was the guy who ducked his head and tried to kill the receiver and knock the ball back, and Franco got.
While the Immaculate Reception was set into motion by the laws of science, it took the heart and will of one player for it to succeed.
And at Penn State, Joe Paterno always mentioned, go to the ball, go to the ball.
He never took a play off. I mean, he finished the play. His assignment on that particular play was to block the outside linebacker. So he goes over to block the outside linebacker. He's not coming. So he sees the scramble, so he starts out to try to become a receiver. So he's in the area there where the ball comes. And, you know, all of this comes from doing more than you're expected to do. That's whatever it takes.
The Immaculate Reception was also crucial to the dream of a dynasty, because in that one moment, the team captured the hearts of all Pittsburgh, providing hope and comfort to a city that desperately needed a hug.
That was the time that the steel industry was going down, and with this difficult era that there was going on with the steel industry and people really losing their jobs, the Steelers just lifted the community and gave the city a sense of pride.
Great. See, we're greater than just mill workers. There's more than that to Pittsburgh, right? Yeah, right.
Every Pittsburgher around here during the 70s felt that they had a piece. They actually owned a piece of that pride and that success that we all experienced as players on the field.
Okay, we'll call a meeting to order. We finished our dinner, we all had a nice meal, and now we got to get ready for tomorrow.
We got 80 strong, with uniforms, marching in. My father's leading cadence with Tony Stagno, the two generals with their helmets, and they're going, go, go, Franco.
Let's go, Franco! And they started a fan club, and it just caught on fire.
The fans had as many great nicknames as the team itself. You've got Jack Ham's Dobra Shunka, the Big Ham, Rocky's Flying Squirrels, Jarella's Gorillas.
Bob Bubanik, the man in the gorilla suit, leads another faction of Steeler fans who have made place kicker Roy Jarella their hero.
And part of that personalization was because of the fact that players were here. Players got involved in charities, and they got involved in the communities. And then all of a sudden, you'd have a fan club somehow, somewhere.
They had something that I grew up with. Both my grandparents were steel workers. My dad worked in a factory all his life. It took a while for those guys to recognize me and to understand who I was, but I was their buddy then. And those guys were really the guys who formed the Banizak Bunch. They made this big, huge banner. The Steelers got upset about it and said, the sign's too big, we can't have that sign anymore. And they had to sneak the sign into the game.
The immaculate reception cemented the bond between town and team and gained national notoriety for Pittsburgh, even with the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra. But with playoff losses to the Dolphins in 1972 and Oakland a year later, the franchise knew it needed more pieces to solve the championship puzzle. And in 1974, they made wide receivers their first priority.
We felt that we had to have some weapons. We searched and came up with, I think, were two real prizes and got them much lower than I thought we'd have to go for them.
Well, Swan was a guy who, the Scots would say, well, he's slow but small. Unbelievable hands. And you ever see the gymnasts in the Olympics? You know, they'll do all these twists and turns.
Pittsburgh on the first round selects Lynn Swan, wide receiver, Southern California.
But to get both Lynn Swan and John Stallworth, it's rumored that the team developed a small case of amnesia when they received the only copy of Stallworth's college film.
So Bill Nunn went back to Alabama A&M, where John Stallworth played, and they gave him the film.
Coach had given Nunn the instructions that we were only allowed to keep it for 7 days and move this film on. So we watched it. 2 weeks have gone by, and the film is still there, and I go in, and they're still watching the film. Now everybody's watched it. My dad watched it. Dan watched it. I think the equipment guys all watched the picture.
Well, somebody else wanted the film, and the Steelers told them, well, we're looking for it here. We'll see if we can find it. They may not admit this, but they purposely kept that film back so the other teams couldn't see it, and thus the mystery of John Stallworth continued, and the Steelers snapped him up.
Dad always used to say, don't complain about being lucky. A lucky guy is always a cheerful guy, and he always seems to be on top of things. You know, so don't complain about being lucky.
Another offensive player they tried their luck on was center Mike Webster.
Scouts weren't so sure about him. Webster didn't time real fast. He wasn't real big.
He wasn't really a reject, but he was very, very marginal.
But Chuck loved smaller linemen who could get leverage, guys who could get out on the edge and block on the run. They came and they finally said, Chuck loves this guy too much. So they drafted Mike Webster in the 5th round.
On defense, the team considered drafting linebacker Jack Lambert, but that choice was also unclear.
In Lambert's case, it was his size. A 6'4", 210-pound middle linebacker. He just seemed too small. So that was the question.
But the Steelers had their answer after a scout witnessed an incident at Kent State.
They were practicing one day on a gravel parking lot because of weather. Jack Lambert comes up, he's diving around, comes up picking gravel out of his legs, and the Steelers just thought this guy was the total ultimate gamer.
You know, he was so tough that, as one guy said, he had hair on his eyeballs.
The Steelers now had more weapons. But would they be enough to trigger a dynasty? What appeared to be a disruptive labor dispute turned out to be an unexpected gift for the Steelers in their first championship season.
1974, players went on strike. It was the first essence of no freedom, no football. And we veterans were on picket duty. We were on strike. We were out in front of camp. And rookies could go into camp. They go into training camp. They got 3 weeks under their belt. It was a rookie class that ultimately allowed 11 rookies to make that team. And 4 of those rookies are now in the Hall of Fame, the only class that ever produced 4 Hall of Famers.
Because of the strike, we had our own identity. So when the veterans came in, they came in to our training camp. And we told them as much. And then the rest was just, let's play football.
One of those classic examples was Joe Gilliam, who, quite frankly, was an extraordinarily talented athlete. I mean, a brilliant quarterback physically, and he went into camp. Terry Bradshaw stayed out. Joe got a jump. He played well. When we got there, he was the man.
Trust me, nobody can throw a football as good as Joe Gilliam. I mean, I could throw it pretty darn good, but Joe Gilliam could flat sling it. For a little skinny kid out of Tennessee State University, he could flat chunk that apple. And a great guy. You know what? Had I lost my job forever to him, I would have always loved him. He was a great guy. I had more fun with him. I laughed at his stupid stories and his excuses for being late.
But no one was laughing after the Raiders buried Gilliam and the Steelers in an early season massacre at Three Rivers.
Obviously, Oakland had become the nemesis. They shut us out. And you thinking that you are a Super Bowl contending team, that can really shatter, your hopes and shatter your confidence.
They had beaten us the year before in the playoffs. They were obviously a very good team. They appeared to have figured out our offense. They appeared to know what Joe Gilliam was going to do. We came out of that thinking, well, we've got to revamp this whole thing. We've got to come up with a new theory. Frankly, the frustration that Chuck had was that Joe Gilliam was not doing what he wanted him to do. He wanted a running attack. He didn't want a wide open passing attack.
When Chuck did switch back to Bradshaw, I was a little surprised about that. But the offense was sputtering. Nothing was happening, and sometimes you have to shake things up.
Terry started, it was not easy for him either. I mean, he struggled, I think, the first few games he played, but he got better every game. From that point forward, the offense got a little bit stronger, a little bit more reliable, a bit more able to control the ball and to win the games.
Just when you get around, just slow down so I can hit you like a hook. Okay. And we got all kind of running room. Yeah.
That running room was Bradshaw's safety valve for broken plays, but was not the best solution to Pittsburgh's problems.
But when you start mixing quarterbacks, that passing game just doesn't really connect the way it should be. And so you have to rely on the running game. And so the running game kind of gets us going.
We were not very explosive. We scored enough points on occasions to win. We were struggling. Terry Bradshaw was still searching for himself. What kind of quarterback was he going to be?
Gradually, Bradshaw gained confidence, helped along by a dynamic defense more than capable of scoring touchdowns on its own.
I think through that season, in retrospect, that's where the team developed intestinal fortitude. There's something that champions have, and Chuck is always saying it just calls it rise to the occasion. And that's all encompassing for me.
This Pittsburgh run through the playoffs would be different from the rest, starting with the defense's special recipe for the Bills.
We figured out scientifically, without any prejudice, who's going to win the ball game. The Steelers are going to win because they're hungry. They didn't have no breakfast today. They've been waiting for the juice.
The steel curtain shut down running back O.J. Simpson, while the offense exploded.
Bradshaw's back. The rush is on. He has to unload it. He does to Blyer. Blyer going in for the touchdown.
Pittsburgh's lopsided win propelled them to the conference championship and a rematch with their most bitter rival.
That week was a week I learned to not like the Oakland Raiders. They were a nemesis, an evil to be defeated in the life of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pittsburgh would seize their first AFC crown on the strength of tackle Ernie Holmes and the front four.
I saw him in the AFC Championship game against the Raiders just be probably as dominating as you can be playing defensive line. The Raiders ended up running the football for about 28 yards total that day, and they love to run that way, left side, right where Ernie was lined up.
Mostly they would attack to their left because Art Shell and Upshaw were there on the left side, Upshaw being the guard and Art Shell being the tackle. But they were almost entirely running to their left, our right, which meant that Dwight White, Fats Holmes, and I were getting the brunt of the action. In fact, once time during that game, Jack Ham came in the huddle and he was so bored, he said, let me take a few shots over on your side.
They were just bewildered. They could not believe what was happening to them. You've heard people brag about a lot of things. They talk about being in the zone. They don't know what the hell the zone is about. Because you don't get there. You don't live in the zone. You visit the zone probably once in your life. I played 13 years. I was in the zone one time, and that was in a playoff game against the Raiders. I think our team was in the zone. It didn't matter who we played, where we played them, they were going to lose.
The game was tight the whole game. Could have gone either way in the fourth quarter. And I think the key play of that game was Jack Ham. He had 2 interceptions, I think, that game, but he suckered Stabler into going to one of his running backs, and he kind of hung back. I couldn't do that kind of thing because I didn't have that burst, but he had the burst that could accelerate it.
Stabler's back to throw, and it is intercepted by Jack Ham.
You know, we just start to feel more in control of that, and really tell you the truth, start feeling, you know what, I think we're the better team here, guys. I tell people that was the biggest game of the whole 70s team, and that really set the tone for what was to come for the rest of the decade.
When you have not won anything in your history, and in that precise moment when you know that the next ball game will be in the Super Bowl, it is, oh man, it just doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any better than that.
Bill, have a good one, huh? Good luck. Brady, have a good one.
First Super Bowl was just down and dirty. It was basic football against the Vikings. It was our running game versus their defense. It was the steel curtain versus the purple people eaters.
The Vikings came out and they were old school. The old theory was you attack the strength. Mistake. Big mistake. They just wasted a lot of downs trying to run the ball. Just sort of lined up and said, here we're coming, and we can beat you guys physically, and they couldn't, and they found that out.
The steel curtain defense also had specific strategies mapped out to contain Vikings Hall of Fame quarterback Fran Tarkenton.
You had great respect for him because you knew he was a seasoned quarterback. He was a little guy, I mean, a real small guy, but he was very elusive. I mean, you have to really make sure you could contain this guy. He's short, you get your hands in his face, you make him throw off, or he can't see his targets. I thought we did a pretty good job on the guys up front. We were able to just beat them, and, you know, once you get past him, you know, doesn't leave Fran very much protection. I mean, he had no place to go.
If you said describe the Steelers, defense. Our defense was our key. We won Super Bowl IX because I didn't make any mistakes and because our defense dominated the opposition.
Pittsburgh's ground game was equally as dominant. Franco Harris earned MVP honors by rushing for 158 yards. And when Bradshaw had to pass, he didn't miss.
Brad throws a strike. I'll never forget that. He hit at Larry Brown in the chest, and you could hear it ricochet off his breastplate. Sounded throughout that stadium as though it was a gun going off.
And I tell people that we said, oh, we enjoyed it so much that we want to do it again. And we enjoyed that so much, we want to do it again.
World champion, number one!
All of a sudden, we're world champions. We went from going to the Super Bowl as a place to be, as to going to the Super Bowl, that's what we are. It was a part of us. We are champions.
When he took the Steelers job in 1969, Chuck Noll set an offensive course which mirrored his own image: strong, disciplined, and innovative.
Well, what we tried to do, number one, we wanted to be able to run the ball.
You make less mistakes by handing the ball off. Being able to control the ball so that you don't get yourself in a situation where you have to go third and long and put yourself in a position of either incomplete or throwing an interception.
The Steelers built a football anomaly, a power running game based on deception.
We would have a lot of influence plays, a lot of plays that they would read one thing and we would be doing something else.
Born of this philosophy was the famed Pittsburgh trapping game.
Center takes nose man. Double team on tackle. Pulling guard kicks end out. Tight end picks off linebacker. Back runs to daylight. A 10-yard gain can be a thing of beauty.
So it was a very quick boom, boom, and everything else revolved around it.
We had to be able to influence people, trap them, run sucker plays, and, get outside quick, or we had linemen that could pull and move. We had a lot of guys that played tight end in college and were our guards.
But Chuck, he's basically looking for a good athlete, an athlete that would, give 100% of himself at all times. And Chuck feels that with that kind of attitude and that kind of player that he can develop him. And his record shows over the last few years that he's gotten those kind of people.
And they were not big guys, but they played together so well, and they played with such great spacing and precision and timing that, they executed that offense beautifully. It was a beautiful thing to watch. It was different, but they knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they knew exactly the kinds of players to make it work.
Fullback Rocky Bleier was considered small and slow, but he found a role.
He became a guard in the backfield.
My role was that of a blocking back, and I get a chance to play, not because of my size or my speed, but because of my ability to block.
Bleier contributed running the ball as well. He rushed for over 3,800 career yards, mostly as a change of pace from the Steelers' featured back, the runaway freight train that was Franco Harris.
I never remember once in my life any coach ever telling me about a certain move or to how to run a certain way.
Well, people think of Franco as a power runner. Franco did some of his best running on the edges. He was faster than people thought, and he really ran well to the outside.
Harris and Bleier became the best running duo of the 70s. In 1976, they each eclipsed 1,000 yards rushing.
Harris trying to get blocking protection, cuts over the left side. He goes into the end zone to score. And off is to Rocky. Rocky driving through people. He's down into the end zone. Touchdown, Pittsburgh.
We played one particular game, and I think one pass was caught by our offense. The Tuesday after, we sat and we watched reviewed the film, and we decided that when that one pass was caught, we both were going to stand up and applaud in the meeting room, and we did. And we got the nastiest look from Chuck Noll when that happened.
Our running game right now is at its peak, and we get a little passing going, and we're going to be hard to beat. Hard to beat.
The Steelers had won the Super Bowl in '74 and then '75. We just felt that we had to play at a higher level, and so we were really competitive among ourselves in a good way. Everybody wanted to make the big play.
It was a great sense of accomplishment the year earlier. Now we know how to do it. Now you know what it really takes. You know how hard you got to work, how much luck you need, how you got to pick up on the defense when the offense isn't doing well.
There was a realization on that team that all the things that Chuck, the Rooneys, had built had come to fruition. We were a championship team, and we had the core of that right there. We didn't have to prove it. We'd already done it. We knew the team could run, we could pass, we could stop a team. We just knew we could put it together. And that second year was more fun during the season because of that confidence.
So 75 we were extremely lethal and very confident that we could take anybody. And we just, for the most part, we whipped everybody. We cleaned their clock.
I'm going to hit it hard, and you just make sure you get outside, because I'm hitting it like a brick.
Defense remained king, but Pittsburgh's offense displayed better balance between its ground game and passing attack. It was more than enough to get the Steelers back to the conference championship against a familiar foe.
To me, that game had as much drama as a Super Bowl. It is one of my favorite games that I was ever involved in. It was a cold day, it was a championship game. They're still bitter because of Franco's immaculate reception. We beat them out there a year before where they were surprised by us. They just feel like, they're angry. They just want to beat us to death, let alone win the game.
Just a typical Oakland Raider Pittsburgh Steeler game. This is not going to be easy, gentlemen. This is a dogfight, last man standing type of thing. Putting your mouthpiece in and you don't take it out.
The Raiders reserved their harshest treatment for Pittsburgh's most graceful receiver.
Came across the middle for a pass. I caught the pass. Atkinson, instead of just a tackle, collared me around the head, which was legal at that time. Fumbled the football, and then I was out. I was out of the ball game and in the locker room, and later on, in an ambulance going to the hospital.
With Swan sidelined, John Stallworth, Pittsburgh's other receiver, grabbed the spotlight.
Harris can't find the hole inside, goes outside to the left, breaks the tackle, he's to the 20 down the sideline. He's going to go for a Pittsburgh touchdown, the first PD of the afternoon.
Franco bounced a run outside, and it looked like the Raiders were going to bottle it up, and somehow Johnny Stallworth, I think he laid one or two Raiders out. Yeah, Franco scored the touchdown, but it was all because of Johnny Stallworth's effort.
John made a great block. Kobe? No, Stallworth. Oh, did he?
Then Stallworth added a score of his own.
Bradshaw is back to pass, gets away, and now he throws to the end zone. Look out! It is caught! The catch by Johnny Stallworth.
The Steelers punched their ticket to a second straight Super Bowl. But it appeared as if they'd have to win it without the help of their leading receiver.
I did not think I was going to be able to play. I was certainly unsure. Had never sustained a concussion of that level. I was in the hospital, I think, for 2 or 3 days. Wasn't catching the ball extremely well at practice. Frankly, my confidence was a little bit low. And the doctors essentially left it up to me as to whether or not I felt like I could play the game.
While Swan assessed his condition, the Steeler defense pondered how to shut down the complex attack of the Dallas Cowboys.
Didn't play them very often, and they ran a different type of offensive scheme than we were customary to. The mindset, though, was we were not going to let the Dallas Cowboys do some things we saw them do to other defenses. The Cowboys run a lot of motion and set changes. The reason is to try to force the defenses into simpler coverages. So Bud Carson and our defensive coaches, in this game in particular, said, if we're in a coverage and they shift, we're not going to go back to a simple coverage. We're going to continue to try to put ourselves in the best scenarios. From a running game standpoint, they run a lot of quick traps inside, and I think they were trying to test the ability for Jack Lambert to correctly read the traps and not get blocked. Lambert really did a great job, really closed it down.
Lambert's performance and fiery leadership made him the star of the Steelers' defense. On offense, the hero would be the balletic Lynn Swann.
The most important catch I had in Super Bowl X was the very first pass thrown to me. I had to make that catch. I don't care where the ball was, I had to catch it. I needed it for my own confidence, to feel like I could still play this game and be in it. Bradshaw throws a pass. It probably in all rights it shouldn't have been thrown to me. Mark Washington, number 46, from Stanford, excellent coverage, excellent position. Once I had that catch under my belt, I was back in the ballgame, back in the saddle again. And there were 5 passes thrown to me in that football game. We completed 4 of them, found a way to make the catches and found a way to make the plays.
Despite near-perfect coverage, Cowboys corner Mark Washington was the unwitting victim to one of the most memorable individual performances in Super Bowl history.
It was in our arsenal. We waited until the 4th quarter to make it happen, and we needed it, and it worked out well.
Bradshaw's back, he wants to throw. Now he fires for the ball, and Lynn Swann going for it. Swann pulls it in for a touchdown. Swann beat his man on a bomb. Swann got a step beyond Mark Washington, has been on him all afternoon.
But that's one of those plays that's not just the execution of me running the route and beating the corner. It is not just the execution of Bradshaw getting the ball to me in the face of a blitz or a line giving him just enough time to get that ball away. There are a lot of things that made that play work, and we put it together, and that was the whole team scoring that 1 touchdown. There are so many things that were at stake in that second Super Bowl. Yes, a championship that was on the minds of everyone else, being back-to-back champions, the beginning of what would become a dynasty. All of those things, time will dictate as to what our position and what our place would be. So for the players on our team in 1975, winning that 1 Super Bowl was our #1 goal. How it is handled and measured throughout time is going to be based on what we did in comparison to what other teams will do in the future, and whether or not we're considered to be the best of all time or one of the best.
Pittsburgh's first 2 Super Bowl championship teams were led by the imposing might of the Steel Curtain defense.
I think that the 1975 defense was probably the most dominating defense in the history of football. They led the National Football League in fewest yardage allowed, fewest points. You had 4 stud defensive linemen that played in front of 3 very athletic and very smart linebackers. And you had a secondary that changed the rules of the game of football. It was, without question, a defense that could go out and win a football game. And there aren't too many times in the history of the National Football League that defenses could do that. And they did it without any trickery, without fooling anybody. We lined up in a basic 4-3 defense and say, here's our defense. We're going to run this thing on 1st down. We're going to run it on 2nd down. And we're going to run it on 3rd down. We're not going to substitute any people. We're not going to bring a nickel package, a dime package in the game. You beat us at what we're best in. And nobody in 75 could do that.
We were awesome. I mean, we were just really basically intimidating. And you could see when we go onto the football field, the opposing teams, I mean, you could just see the attitude that they just knew that, hey, this was just a game on their schedule, but they didn't expect to win it. We had, at every position, all-pro players, and we were doing things that the league just hadn't seen.
It was really kind of a perfect storm that they had there because they had really great personnel, and they had a defensive coach who was very creative in Bud Carson, and also a guy that was willing to be unconventional. It would have been very easy to take the personnel that he had and just play straight up 4-3 defense like everybody else played and just let him play, and he probably would have been fine. But Bud wasn't willing to settle for that. He wanted to take it and tweak it in just a way that let everybody play to their best advantage.
Bud Carson really brought the cover two concept, which was bigger corners, more physical corners, safeties who played half the field, and then the key element was the pass rush, that you had to have four guys who could pressure the passer and make him get rid of the ball quick. What Coach Carson taught, that this is how we're going to do things. We're going to be a team that's very physical, we're going to be fast, and it was a thinking man's defense.
When Bud Carson would come in and start putting the game plan on our defense that we're going to run against these formations, it was always exciting because it was not always the same stuff. And it wouldn't even be the same stuff from the last time we played that same team. We might change it completely.
You didn't even know the coverage you were going to play when you came out of the huddle. It depended on the formation that they were in, and you had to get those checks on the run. If he could be in a better defense, he didn't want to be stuck in something that wasn't as good, and he expected us to do it. One of his favorite favors is he'd come in the meeting. Now, man, I know this is a hard concept, but if we're smart, we can handle it. Well, what are you going to say? Well, no, we can't handle it. Yeah, okay, give it to us. Give it to us. We'll get it done.
One game, I'll never forget this, we're in the tunnel to be introduced, the defense is going to be introduced, and Bud comes down and he says, I've decided to change all the defenses. We're going to go to, instead of giving, defense number 1, we'll do defense number 6. He changes everything that we have to learn in a matter of seconds before we run out on the field, go out and play.
According to Woody, he's helping the block. He's going to pick up somebody.
He would always say, I can put you in position to make plays. If you make the plays, we'll win. Bud was the perfect guy because he did have strong beliefs. He knew what he was doing, and he wasn't afraid to go against the grain of what everybody else was doing. He didn't have to follow the crowd.
Chuck Noll gave Carson and his coaches the freedom to create and experiment. One such innovation was a defensive front designed to expand on the considerable talents of Mean Joe Green.
Joe Green tried a new technique called, we call it the stunt 4-3. He jumped in the gap between the guard center, tilted his body, and just blew through that gap, and it was devastating. People didn't know what to do.
By lining up at an odd angle, Green was able to avoid double teaming or disrupt blocking schemes to allow other defenders to swarm to the ball.
We were able to mix up the defense by running line stunts. So for 2 years, 74 and 75, Super Bowl 9 and 10, no one had the right answer.
The guy in the middle is clogging up everything. You can't outrun LC on the left. You can't outrun me on the right. I mean, where are you going to go? So Joe just sort of just took away the whole interior of the offensive line and made them run outside going towards the sideline where we want them to go anyway.
The great thing about the front four is that they could put all the heat on the quarterback by themselves. They didn't need blitzes. Jack Ham and I and Lambert rarely blitzed. We didn't have to. So we were able, therefore, to play pass defense. Coach Noll, he said, I want 7 people playing pass defense. You think about it, there's only 5 receivers, and we got 7 people covering 5 receivers, and constantly Ham and I were out over the out ends, and we were redirecting. In those years, the rules allowed you to redirect them and reroute them so they couldn't go where they wanted to go. So the opponent was struggling to find their routes because we would just take it away from them. You don't see that much happening today. Linebackers pretty much blitz or they drop back to a zone.
Carson's cutting-edge strategies were helped along by the superb skills of 2 Hall of Fame linebackers.
The big hits that linebackers make, and you hope to make those kind of hits throughout the course of a game or a season. But I took a lot of pride in the passing game. I took a lot of pride in matching up on running backs, the halfback out of the backfield or the tight end. Normally they say that's a mismatch. Well, I didn't buy that. I think that if you've got a good technique and a good quickness and you can play man-to-man, getting interceptions and playing the passing game and making people think that a linebacker is not a weak link in the passing game, he can end up being a strength.
You know, Jack Ham and Andy Russell and myself all played in the 220 range, and we had to be able to run. to Bud Carson's credit, Bud was a defensive coordinator for the Steelers. We started to do things that no middle linebackers had ever done before, mainly in pass coverage. You know, he had us covering the tight ends man-to-man. He had us covering halfbacks in a spread formation. He had us doubling wide receivers. Things like that which were unheard of back when Nitschke and Butkus and Willie Lanier and those guys played. We didn't come off the field. You know, when it was 3rd and down or obvious passing situations, we were out there playing. We never came off. In fact, I was a linebacker in our prevent defense, covering people.
Deeper drops by the middle linebacker was one component of the Cover 2 scheme. Others included the many unconventional responsibilities placed on the Steelers' secondary.
What they don't talk about the Cover 2 is the corner support responsibilities. Any outside running play, either one of those corners had to take on fullbacks, guards, or running backs, and they were the corner support. So that's why we had these big corners.
You really force the wide receivers to have to block these big corners as opposed to just being wide receivers out there running pass routes. So it changed the way people could attack. You know, Mel was 6'3" and 215. J.T. Thomas was 6'2" and 215. Trying to find guys like that who could hit and like to hit because they were going to make 75, 100 tackles a year. They weren't just going to be cover guys.
The Steelers' corners were as big as their linebackers. And Pittsburgh's safeties had to be much faster than what the position traditionally called for.
Cover 2, we had good safeties that could there's only 2 guys deep, and they were so good, Glenn Edwards and Mike Wagner, that they could cover half the field deep, which was not an easy thing to do.
You could not play in the secondary for a Chuck Noll, Bud Carson team unless you tackled. And you're going to tackle a lot.
One of the things that I always wanted to do was let people know that this is my territory. If you come in here, you're going to have to pay. That was not just me. It was 11 guys out there wanting to put the hat on somebody to get them to understand that, you know, you can't come in here. It was an attitude that we brought to the table whenever we hit the field.
We had a defense that was really physical, but they played what they were told to play and what they were supposed to play. Now, when you guys got like Joe Green and Jack Ham and Jack Lambert and Mel Blount, and what they do is exceedingly well, then you have probably one of the best defenses of all time.
You know, to me, that is about as perfectly constructed and perfectly coached a defensive unit as I've ever seen in pro football. I mean, it all came together there. It was the right players, it was the right coach, it was the right time, it was the right system. And that's how you wind up with something that has the greatness and the staying power of the Steel Curtain.
The confident Pittsburgh Steelers began 1976 as undisputed world champions. 43 proud players, 10 proven coaches, all seeking an unprecedented 3rd consecutive Super Bowl victory.
You had to give them a strong chance to three-peat, and of course that was the battle cry, three-peat. But, hey, it was a tough football league. You know, you had some pretty good teams in there, Houston and the Raiders and one club or another.
We all thought it was going to be a three-peat type of a year, but in retrospect, I think we weren't probably as focused as we had been the previous 2 years. Sort of slipped into a complacency type of attitude. You know, we could roll our helmets on the field, so to speak, and people would just drop, but it didn't turn out to be that way.
The first 5 games of that season, we were 1-4, and everybody counted us out. So now you guys are fatheads now. You don't have the drive, the enthusiasm anymore.
Very lousy this year. They don't have no get up and go power. I don't know what's wrong with them.
They're cocky. They think they're on top. They think they have a guaranteed berth in the Super Bowl.
And everybody thought, well, the Steelers are counting their paycheck, their Super Bowl checks and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't the case. We were trying too hard.
Different people making mistakes, Jack Ham included. On defense, we're giving up big plays, and anything that could go wrong in those first 4 games did for us, and we dug ourselves a huge hole. I don't care what level you're playing at, and we're at the professional level, we started to doubt ourselves a little bit and question whether you're right, whether we could get back to not only a playoffs or whatever, we're trying to get back to a winning 500 record to get somewhere into the hunt.
And we had to sit down and say, who are we? And what kind of football team are we? We can't afford to lose another ball game. We can get to a Super Bowl with 4 losses. We can't get there with 5.
And we lost Terry, I think, in that 5th ball game. And we had a meeting. Chuck had a meeting and said that Terry is not going to be playing for a while, and the pressure of winning is going to have to be dispersed between offense, defense, and special teams. And right now, it looks like the defense is going to have to carry the burden.
Joe Green got up and faced the defense in the locker room, and he said, from here in, nobody crosses the 50-yard line.
For the rest of the season, the Steeler defense carried the team on its back with a performance unlike any in modern NFL history.
All of a sudden, we kind of woke up and realized, hey guys, we're world champions.
We didn't give up first downs, let alone touchdowns.
We knew we could not give up hardly any points at all if we expected to win any games.
Over a 9-week stretch, the steel curtain was nearly impregnable, yielding only 28 points.
I think, it was a bit of retaliation. You thought we were out, but no way.
By the time the regular season was over, they had pitched 5 shutouts that defense had, which was unheard of. You don't do that in the NFL. And even in the 1970s, you didn't do that in the NFL. Couldn't be done, but they did it.
In those 9 remaining games, we won all 9. And at that time, I do remember that, hey, I think we're going to make it again. I mean, we're playing unbelievable football. To me, it was Steeler football like I've never seen it before.
In the first round of the playoffs, the 10-4 Steelers stormed into Baltimore and crushed a talented Colts team picked by many to reach the Super Bowl. The cost of victory, however, was steep, as both Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier were sidelined by injuries.
And we go into the championship game against the Oakland Raiders with only one healthy running back. When you come into a championship game, especially against the Oakland Raiders, not at full strength, it takes something away from your style of play, and we lose that game. I think that's what we learned in '76, is that you can't have one aspect of the game to be a dominant force, because if they take it away, where do you go from there?
The absence of the starting backfield began a significant transformation for Chuck Noll and the Steelers teams of the late '70s. The 1976 AFC Championship game proved that Pittsburgh could no longer rely as heavily on the running game as it had in years past.
What you have to understand is that you take what's given to you. You take what evolves and what's coming. When you've been a dominant rushing team, people are going to focus on stopping that run. And they did that very well. You can't take anything away from the opposing defenses. I mean, if I'm a coach and I'm going to look at the Steelers coming in 1978, what am I going to do here? Well, I mean, the first thing is, what's their strength? Well, let's take it back and look at what they've done. They've run the ball. They've run the ball. They've run the ball. And so if we can stop Franco, specifically, if we can stop Franco, then we'll take our chances with the passing.
Before the 1978 season, Terry Bradshaw and offenses throughout the NFL received a rare gift. A new rule meant to curtail the physical play of corners like Mel Blount changed the way receivers would be covered.
That's the Mel Blount rule. They minimized the effectiveness, or tried to minimize the effectiveness of Mel Blount.
Every year, the National Football League comes up with some rules changes. This year, the most important changes concern pass coverage and the interaction between receivers and defenders. This is a double chuck by a defensive back rotated up in the 5-yard area, which is not legal. Ready?
This double chuck is not legal because the same defender is not allowed to make two separate contacts on the same receiver.
In Lynn Swann and John Stallworth, the Steelers had receivers who could take advantage of the new rule. But that wasn't the only rule change that would benefit the Pittsburgh offense.
During a legal pass block, hands, open or closed, must be inside the blocker's elbows and can be thrust forward to contact an opponent as long as that contact is within the opponent's frame.
The new rules hampered the Pittsburgh defense, but it unleashed an explosive new dimension to the Steelers' attack.
When they changed the rules, the Steelers adjusted their offense and really went more from a power run game to an air attack, and Bradshaw had a field day.
Here's Bradshaw going back deep. They're coming after him, chase him out of the pocket, running to the left, and he fires downfield into the crowd. Cunningham makes a catch over the shoulder of the defensive back. Can you believe that?
The nature of the team changed. The team who won those two Super Bowls was really a team that was all about running the ball and playing defense. By the time they came back for their last two Super Bowls, their running game, it was still good, but it wasn't what it had been. And the Steelers had some games those last two Super Bowl years where they had to outscore people.
Here is Bradshaw giving the ball to Blyer. Blyer reverses it to Swann. He gives it back to Bradshaw. Bradshaw firing for Cunningham. A Pittsburgh touchdown. How about that?
The Bradshaw of their first two Super Bowls, well, specifically the first Super Bowl, bore little resemblance to the Bradshaw of their last Super Bowl.
Gone was the hapless Hick. In his place stood a savvy field general.
1978 kind of dawns on him what he can and can do. He can read defenses. He knows what plays to call now. And he feels very confident, I think, in his own ability and his ability to be able to change whatever Chuck might want him to do. Our success offensively was based on Brad. How Brad felt, how he played, so went the game.
Terry was just daring. He knew he could get the ball into just the tightest of spots. But he also knew that he had some guys that could catch the ball.
With Bradshaw's unlimited arm strength, Swann and Stallworth became the best receiving tandem in pro football.
Our passing offense, at least, was built on field. Terry's feel for me and my feel for him and his feel for Swann and vice versa.
Swann and Stallworth really started to shine, and it was just incredible seeing what they started to do. There was really a big contrast there. John, tall and lengthy, Lynn, kind of small and short.
Man's Hollywood. He's Hollywood all the way. I mean, he's a California boy, Southern California. That was the Arab, Lynn Swann. He loved the cameras. He was flamboyant. The fans loved him.
John, on the other hand, very quiet, very low-key. John tries to really get no attention.
But to get passes thrown their way, both receivers sought attention from their quarterback.
Bradshaw's calling his plays. Guys would be in the huddle, and or just prior to getting in the huddle, they'd be in Bradshaw's ear, especially Swann and Stallworth.
Throw it to me, I'll be open. If I'm not open, throw it anyway. We'll make the catch. If I need to get out of bounds, I'll get out of bounds. Don't worry about a thing, just throw it.
Perfect. Okay, let's...
Of course, John Stallworth is saying the same thing.
It's a great comforting fact to know that if I need to run, I got a Hall of Fame running back. If I need to throw, I got two outstanding wide receivers. I'll tell you what you get from it, confidence. You get a great amount of confidence. When you walk up in a big game, knowing that these guys are going to be there for you, you can depend on them, you can trust them, you know they're smart, they're intelligent, they'll take chances catching, they'll take chances running. It's a powerful feeling to step on. You ever sit on top of a great horse? You sit on him and you feel that power. That's about what it's like.
In 1977, a phenomenon called Broncomania swept through the NFL, and not even the Steelers were able to stop it. Pittsburgh was bounced from the playoffs in the first round, an abrupt end to a disappointing season.
I just don't think that the focus was there. It was one of those seasons where we just didn't, nobody seemed to have reached the goals that were set in the organization. It was kind of a wash year as far as I'm concerned.
1977 is kind of a mixed up year. We get some holdouts, we get some injuries, we're not playing well. So Chuck's at a crossroads. What had taken place, he can't allow to happen anymore, to figure on the run in a dominant role. So in 1978, the emphasis wasn't necessarily on the running game, although it was a big part, as it is in any game, but it now became a more open game. Getting those quick scores, and no matter where we were, we could always come from behind. In 78, I felt we could beat anybody in the league. In all honesty, that was the most fun I ever had playing.
It really went more from a power run game to an air attack. That whole season was just tremendous, watching Bradshaw throw the ball and watching those guys catch it.
The offense was so much better in terms of their ability to strike anywhere, throwing the football to tight ends, both receivers. But Terry had a grasp of the offense, and he knew all his tools, and he knew how to get to them. The offense was the dominant entity in 78.
While the offense improved, the defense was forced to regroup because of the rules changes that now limited what was legal on a football field.
From our defensive guys, oh my goodness gracious, they whined and they complained, about rule changes. It's like we can't hit the quarterback, we can't hit the receivers. That became the mantra of the defense. But yet, given those rule changes, they found out ways to be able to do it, to still be dominant, to still get the job done.
We have to do things different. We might have to disguise ourselves a little bit better, camouflage your defenses, or do whatever is necessary to force a mistake by the opponent. If you had that kind of talent, then it's not a big problem. I think we proved that it didn't really affect our defense because we still went on and won 2 more Super Bowls after that. I think we knew we had a special team. We were on our way to a special season, and once we got into the season and finished 14-2, we didn't think that nobody could beat us.
Armed with the best regular season record in franchise history, Pittsburgh rolled through the playoffs, ending a 2-year drought by returning to the Super Bowl for a rematch with Dallas.
We liked to play the Cowboys. We wanted to go out and be very physical against them because we felt that was what we had to do to win. We wanted to run the football and, in a sense, possess the ball to keep our defense off the field, to take some of the pressure off of them. But Dallas had a pretty darn good run defense, and they were all geared to stop our run, so we had to throw the football, probably more than we normally do. We had the wherewithal to do that, but it wasn't something that we wanted to rely on.
Dallas was a hard team to play. They were a hard team to pick up on coverage-wise. And even though I was confident going into that game, I was also nervous because I never played well statistically against them, but I would hit some big plays occasionally on them.
Bradshaw hesitates and then throws deep for Stallworth in the end zone. Touchdown, Pittsburgh! Johnny Stallworth caught it between 2 Dallas Cowboys.
Stallworth's score was a result of conscientious study conducted earlier in the week by Lynn Swan.
I grabbed a whole bunch of game film from the Cowboys to watch them in this particular situation. And it was a habit. The safeties would read a 3-step drop, thinking a 3-step drop meant a quick pass.
He saw that the corners for Dallas seemed to bite on what we call an eye cut, which is a 4-yard little angle to the inside. And Lynn suggested that we fake that and go deep. Bradshaw pumped, and Kyle did exactly what we expected him to do. He jumped on the eye cut, and I sort of faded to the outside, and Bradshaw lofted the pass, probably too high. We were able to come up with the catch.
Stallworth would soon score again with help from his receiving partner. Only this time, that help would come well after the snap.
Swan and I both lined up on the same side of the ball. He was to go deep, and I was going to occupy some folks' corners and maybe a linebacker underneath, giving him a little bit more room over top. Bradshaw, in his wisdom, thought that the shorter pass was a better pass.
Bradshaw is back there, and he fires. Caught by Stallworth at the 35, breaks the tackle, comes over the 40, the 45. The 50, he's breaking downfield, going to the Dallas 30, the 20, the 10, a touchdown for Pittsburgh. 75-yard strike to Johnny Stallworth.
Their corners were not able to stop Swan and I from catching the football. And we could, if Bradshaw could throw and we could run and catch, then we could score. I sort of knew as I turned to catch the football where Kyle was. And so I moved to the inside and rocked back to the outside. Running downfield, saw Swan, and Lynn shielded one guy off.
Our coach always told us, when we were rookies, he told us, the difference between a 5-yard gain and touchdown might be a receiver's block downfield. So we're downfield blocking, John's running across the field, he's got the good legs, he's strong, and people can't judge his speed extremely well, and boom, next thing you know, he's in the end zone.
Stallworth would eventually share center stage with Swan, as both receivers eclipsed the 100-yard receiving mark.
There aren't too many teams that just go one-on-one. You're going to have some kind of in and out, long and short, double coverage on your wide receivers, especially against us at that time, because our big threats were our wideouts. We didn't do much to tight ends or backs out of the backfield until we had to.
Late in the first half, the Steelers were faced with just such circumstances.
We got down close in. The play that Rocky caught was not originally designed to go to him. He was not the first receiver, and I don't think he was the second. He may not have been the third, but glad he was there.
Bradshaw rolling to the right. Thereafter, he throws on the move into the end zone and is caught for a touchdown to Rocky Bleier.
D.D. Lewis, their outside linebacker, read it as a run, jumped across the line, and took my path away. So all I could do was kind of slide in behind him. Now a broken play. Bradshaw is scrambling to his right. And all I can think about is jumping as high as I can.
If you throw this pass to Rocky Bleier 10 times, he's going to catch it once, okay, and happen to be in the Super Bowl. I never knew Rocky could jump that high. That was the kind of play that helps you win a tight Super Bowl. Something that they figure you don't normally do, but in this game, you have an opportunity, and somebody steps up and makes the play.
Lynn Swan would have to be that somebody after leg cramps put Stallworth out of action at the beginning of the third quarter.
Second half, he was looking a little bit more to me with John out of the ball game to make some things happen, and so he stuck with me. By all rights, on my touchdown play, if Terry's reading what the secondary is doing, he's not going to throw me that football. But because he looked at me and he was going to stay with me, allowed me the time to read it, make an adjustment, and we end up with 6 points.
Bradshaw is back, and he's going to Swan, and Swan makes his circus catch in the end zone. What a brilliant throw by Bradshaw. What a brilliant catch by Swan. The backs have been broken now, there's no question.
The touchdown I scored was essentially the same touchdown that John scored on in the first half. 42, I takeoff. But to the Cowboys' credit, they were not going to be burned twice by the same play. Harris didn't come up. Terry pump faked it. I saw the safety right there. Instead of going to the post, I bent it like an inside seam to the outside. Now, there was no help on the outside. Safety tried to jump up. He couldn't get there. It was too high for him, and the ball is just over his fingertips, and just to a point where I could reach it, I make the catch, I'm in the end zone, it's a touchdown.
Once again, you couldn't gun the quick post because of underneath coverage. So I held it a little bit, threw it off my back foot, threw it hard and high. Both my receivers are in the Hall of Fame. And that catch by Lynn was a classic example of why he's in the Hall of Fame.
And the Pittsburgh Steelers will become the first team in the history of the NFL to win 3 Super Bowls.
After winning our 3rd Super Bowl in '78, I don't think Chuck gave us enough time to celebrate. He came right out and predicted that we were going after it again, that he didn't feel that we had peaked as a team yet. We knew that in order for us to have our place in history, to be the first team to win 4 Super Bowls would set us apart from any other team that played the game to that point.
The expectations, the pressure, and knowing that you have to go back and defend that title, it was a great challenge, but it's like anything else. After a certain point, it begins to wear on you. All of a sudden, you have this big bullseye on your back, and people want to knock you off. So you don't just have 1 Super Bowl. You have 16 Super Bowls you got to play the next season because everybody is going to gear up for you.
For the first time, the steel curtain was no longer bulletproof.
People tried to find ways to beat our defense, and they had some success in doing that. Everybody talks about the '79 Steeler defense as a defense that was in a decline. Even my former teammates will talk about that. But if you look at it statistically, we still gave up the fewest yardage in the AFC. We only gave up 48 points in the 4th quarter of ball games. 48 points in 16 ball games. It's only 3 points a game, if my math is right. That's an incredible statistic. We weren't as dominating physically as we were back then, but we'd hit you. We would run and we would hit you.
Although our defense was long in the tooth, we still had a very good defense. We could still stop people. We still intimidated people.
Age was one factor for the decline, but the defense's most serious problem was keeping the starting 11 healthy.
We were devastated by injuries. We had 5 and 6 starters on defense out for a lot of games in 1979. Dwight White was hurt. Joe Green missed a number of games. Jack Lambert played with a separated shoulder the entire season. That's tough football.
The defense probably wasn't as strong as it had been in the previous years, but the offense had taken up the slack. We had become a better offensive group. And I think to be a good offensive football team, you have to have weapons. Then you don't have to do them with flim-flam and trickery. Our passing offense, at least, was built on feel. Terry's feel for me and my feel for him, and know that Terry's going to stay with me until I beat that guy. And he knew I was going to beat him and turn back for football, and he was going to throw it, and we were going to have the completion.
The offense put up points in bunches, but was equally as prolific with the number of times it gave the football away.
Turnovers was a big concern. Certainly we did not know that was going to be a recurring theme throughout the year, that we were going to have a lot of turnovers. In fact, lead the league in turnovers.
Even so, Pittsburgh still finished with the NFL's best regular season record.
He's breaking downfield to 20, the 10, the 5, 75-yard strike to Johnny Stallworth.
After winning both their playoff games, the Steelers traveled west to take on a 9-7 Rams team. Pittsburgh was quickly installed as the prohibitive favorite.
Their game plan was pretty simple and very effective. They were going to run Wendell Tyler wide. We go into the game without Jack Ham, and, I think that's a big loss for us.
Super Bowl 14, they're getting after us pretty good in this game. Wendell Tyler was running up the middle, and he gained maybe 12 yards or so, and Jackie Slater was running up the field blocking. He was saying, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you, Jesus." And I told Dwight, and Dwight said, hey, Jesus ain't got nothing to do with this thing we're getting ready to do with these people. Well, we're in trouble.
The game itself was very competitive. I don't think we had a big head, but maybe didn't prepare ourselves the way we should have prepared for that game. Maybe not as intense as we should have been. Rams had 3 or 4 coaches that were former Steeler coaches that knew our cadence, they knew Bradshaw, they knew Swan, they knew Stallworth, they knew what we were good at and what we were not so good at. The kind of offense that we had, the coverages that they played against our receivers, so sort of an in and out coverage, didn't allow us to do the things that we wanted to do. What they were guarding against was a 15 to 20-yard route, and we ran a lot of those across the middle, and that coverage stuff didn't allow us to do that. I think that presented us with some problems.
I may have my mistakes. I may turn it over, but I would come back somehow, some way. I had all my doubts like anybody else, but once I got out there, I was supremely confident. I would like to think that I was a big game player. I was comfortable in big games. Big games didn't make me nervous.
Bradshaw hit Swan deep in the third quarter to erase a Rams lead. But when Pittsburgh lost Lynn to injury, John Stallworth stepped into the breach.
I didn't feel any added pressure because of Lynn being out of the game. Certainly didn't want to see him hurt. Outside of his well-being, still thinking that we still had to come up with the big play and that I was more than capable of doing that. My route is to fake a hook about 15 yards downfield, having a guy on my inside and a guy on my outside, that a hook would draw both of those guys in. If I do it correctly, then I'm going to be free straight down the field with no one there to stop me or to knock the ball away.
There goes Stallworth. He pulls it in at the 30, the 20, the 10, the 5, and it's a touchdown for Pittsburgh on the ball to Stallworth.
My initial read on the ball, my initial thoughts, and this is exactly what I thought, and I said, damn it, Bradshaw, you've overthrown me, and really turned away from the ball and just started to run.
One loss for the ball game, but you still got a John Stallworth to come through and make the nifty catch and go all the way.
The Steelers were back on top. The defense and Jack Lambert would make certain they stayed there.
Lambert comes in the huddle and he's still screaming. Now's our time. We have to stop him now. We can't afford to let him score. And then he makes a tremendous football play. He intercepts a pass. He's at least 25 yards downfield. There's no other middle linebacker in the game of football that would have been 25 yards downfield. But Jack Lambert was, because we knew that deep crossing route was one of their favorite plays. And they hadn't shown it yet, and there was Jack when we needed him. And he intercepts the ball.
One more touchdown would put the Steelers in a place where no previous team had ever been.
You're not going to throw high percentage passes against the Rams. Go deep and get the big play because they're going to take away high percentage passing.
And Bradshaw lets it fly down the middle, and there goes Stallworth again. And he has it. Does he hold it? He does. Stallworth beats the coverage again and takes it.
Same exact route that we had before. And I said, Bradshaw, you've underthrown me. I'm open. I'm more open this time than I was last time. Had Terry thrown it out further, I think I would score it again.
They went straight down the middle on the bomb. And Johnny Stallworth on the receiving end.
And he makes this unbelievable over-the-shoulder catch again for a huge play. 3 or 4 plays later, we take it in and a Franco touchdown. And now the game's over.
Harris slashes off the left side for a touchdown. Franco Harrison slashing off the left side for a Steeler touchdown.
When you have players making plays like that, it's hard to beat a football team when your Hall of Famers are making the plays that they're supposed to make.
The Pittsburgh Steelers are the champions of the National Football League for the 4th time.
In 1980, the Steelers failed to make the playoffs for the first time in 8 years.
Joe Green came up with one for the thumb. T-shirts was being sold and fans going around saying one for the thumb, but it never happened because we just never could get in sync. We just really didn't have the same kind of fire.
It was time for players to retire. I had announced my retirement. That was going to go.
What the Steelers faced in the early 80s was what all great teams face at the end of their run, which is things begin to catch up with you. Your great players get older, injuries become a factor, ultimately has an attrition effect on teams. And there are a lot of great teams that fall off the edge of the earth at times like that. But really good teams with a really good organization, a really good coaching staff can continue to win.
Nothing more than your best effort on every play.
With the steady leadership of the Rooneys and their championship formula, the team played in 35 postseason games over the next 32 years and added one for the thumb under Noel's successor, Bill Cowher.
Mr. Rooney, this is yours now.
Let's get this thing in the end zone. How about that? That'd be good.
When Cowher passed along the Steeler philosophy to Mike Tomlin, only the third head coach in nearly 4 decades, the franchise added a ring for the other hand. But none of that would be possible without the lessons learned in the 1970s.
Vaughn makes a circus catch in the end zone. Unbelievable catch for the touchdown.
That's why we are still talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers of that era, being able to stand the test of time, doing it with style and dignity. That was part of the fabric of our teaching and why we did what we did and why we did it the way we did it.
Chuck Noll always preached that it's not about ego, it's about a team effort. And we got into this where we were really rooting for and pulling for each other. No petty jealousies. When we put it all together, it was a beautiful thing to witness.
And if there's anything the Steelers of the 70s epitomized, I think it's that teamwork.
Oh, that brings back great memories. I'm going to savor this for a minute.
The Dynasty's legacy is now forever cast in bronze, where 2 owners, a coach, and 9 teammates are enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
If I could start my life all over again, I would be a professional football player, and you damn well better believe I'd be a Pittsburgh Steeler.